everyone, and welcome. Well, the clock has just turned 12 o'clock on the West Coast, and I'm very excited to welcome all of you to today's webinar. My name is Ryan Miller. I'm the founder and CEO of Etna Interactive, and it is my great pleasure today to welcome to our call from BSM Consulting, Glenn Morley and Edward Wynne. Hello, good day to both of you.
Hi, Ryan.
Hi, Edward. So by way of introduction, let me just acquaint those that are on the call with us today. Some of you may not be familiar with BSM, with your company and with you. I've had the great pleasure of working alongside both Glenn and Edward for many, many years. BSM Consulting is, I think, literally a household name in the ophthalmology industry, and they may not enjoy, I think, quite as much fame in the area of aesthetics, a fame that I think is very much deserved for all of the years that you've worked closely with our industry and our specialty. BSM Consulting is an amazing group of people serving practices all over North America, and I think globally as well. So certainly our interactions with your team are here in North America. Glenn Morley in particular, senior consultant with BSM, she's worked with a huge variety of both individual and group practices, large corporate clients, really focusing in on identifying those needs and issues that are hindering their growth. She's driving in these strategic solutions that help them achieve their objectives and serve, especially for those corporate entities, those stakeholders who are looking for performance inside the practice. She's a nationally recognized thought leader and educator, and of course here today as a speaker. And I have to say, from my own personal experience, Glenn has worked with many of the practices that we serve, and she is just an incredibly impactful consultant. So Glenn, it's my great pleasure to have you. And yeah, thank you so much. And Edward, I think you're going to be leading us off today. Edward's senior director over at BSM Consulting, and started back in 2008 as a part of the financial analyst team, really focused on today's topic, producing these financial benchmarking reports for medical aesthetics, dermatology, and med spas. In 2014, he stepped up to the role that he's in today, being responsible both for financial services and the relationship that BSM enjoys with Allergan's APC team, and really focuses in today, I think a big part that's relevant for what we'll be talking about today are these massive databases that BSM has that includes this detailed financial benchmarking that allows us to see where we are and where we should be. Because I think, guys, as we turn this over to you, what everybody on this call is interested in, I think we all feel sometimes like, well, we could or we should be doing better. And we're looking for either the validation or the inspiration on where we need to focus the time and energy to improve things in our practice. So with that, let me turn it over to you and see what y'all have to say.
Thank you, Ryan. I appreciate the introduction. Glenn and I certainly appreciate your kind words, and we enjoy working so much with Etna Interactive and appreciate the opportunity to present to you all today. So we're excited to both be here to share with you some patient conversion results from other practices like your own, including the top performers in your industry. But mostly, we love to use this information to challenge you and make you think. Think about how your practice may be executing in comparison to top performers. Think about what you may be able to do differently or better to achieve success and enhance your customers' experience. Think about the economic opportunity of making improvements to your practice. After all, having great information is important, but the ability to use that data to make great decisions is a true measure of leadership. At BSM, we've been sharing industry information and helping to educate both ophthalmology and medical aesthetic practices for over 30 years. We've also had the good fortune of working closely, as Ryan mentioned, supporting a practice consulting team from Allergan, the APC team. Programs developed in conjunction with that team provide us with the performance data on healthcare practices that we can in turn share back with the industry. So today, during our webinar, we're going to share some of these data with you, isolate the top performing practices, and provide you with some guidance on how to achieve these results. Both Ryan and I have mentioned the APC or Allergan practice consulting team, with which we've co-created an assessment tool to measure procedure conversion. Focusing on surgical procedures, the APC works with the practice to enter between 100 and 150 consultations into the tool. That assessment captures and reports back to the practice overall patient and individual procedure conversion rates, no-show rates, as well as the impact of consultation fees and referral sources. The information is collated in our database, which to date includes 220 practices and just over 25,000 consultations. Before getting into the results, it's important to define conversion in this context, as there are many different references to conversion in the industry. For example, one such measure could be patient leads to consultation visits. For purposes of this assessment and the information we're going to review today, conversion is a measure of patients converting from a consultation visit to completing a procedure. The first set of data we'll review will be overall industry no-show results, or those patients that scheduled a consultation but failed to show up. We also provide a comparison here to the 90th percentile, or top 10% of practices. You can see that the no-show rate at the median, or the average practice, is around 9%, and the top 10%, the no-show rate is around 2%. Those practices able to reduce their no-show rates typically provide or screen prospective patients well and also incorporate an effective patient reminder system. This next set of data highlights overall conversion rates out of our database, or those patients that completed a procedure, with the majority of practices demonstrated here at the median converting around 46%. The top performers are converting closer to 70% of their consults. An interesting side note of this program has been that we've found actual conversion rates to be much lower than those that are reported by providers. Top performing practices tend to regularly evaluate conversion rates and identify areas of opportunity for additional staff and/or provider training. So after looking here at overall no-show and conversion rate, it only makes sense to dive a little bit deeper and evaluate these metrics for individual procedures. So as I mentioned, this assessment tool focuses on surgical procedures. Here is a listing of the top 5 that we represent in the database, and it provides you with a comparison of the no-show rates at the median, or most practices, compared to those of the top 10. You can see here that most practices' average no-show rate is somewhere around 8 to 10%, with those in the top 10% able to have patients attend their consultations at around 4%. Regarding patients attending consultations and completing a procedure, this last data table offers a comparison of all practices again in the top 10. As you can see, most practices are converting around 50% of their surgical consultations, with the top performers around 70%. As I review these data points, many of you may already be considering your current conversion rates, how to improve them, and what the economic opportunity of doing so would mean for your practice. Before turning things over to Glenn, I thought I'd walk through a quick exercise to demonstrate the impact of improving your conversion rates and share just a few additional data points. The funnel illustrated here has 2 sides, both with the potential to convert 1,000 patients. The left side of the funnel illustrates lower or more average conversion rates, while the right shows slightly higher rates of conversion, more along the lines of those top performers. As you can see and would expect, the slightly higher conversion rates may result in significantly higher patient procedure volume. The difference between the 300 patients completing a procedure at the bottom of the funnel on the left and the 455 on the right is an increment of 155 patients. To demonstrate the financial impact of this increased conversion, we take the incremental patients of 155 from the previous slide, multiplied by an average revenue rate per procedure. In this case, it may be for an injectable treatment, and arrive at an estimated total revenue increase of $93,000.
Hey, Edward, if I can interject, we've got the first question coming in, and I don't know that you actually have this data available, but one of our viewers today is asking whether that top 10% commonly was mastering both the no-show rate and the conversion rate, or if perhaps there wasn't an intersection of excellence on both of those two key areas that influence the final conversion number?
That's a great question. They are evaluated separately, but there is a correlation between a low no-show rate and a high conversion rate in the database.
Oh, excellent.
Great question.
So, and then just as a reminder for everybody who joined the call, we've had about another 20 attendees joined just shortly after we started. As a reminder, if you'd like to send questions like that one in during the live event, hover your mouse over the bottom of your screen, click Q&A, and type your question in so I can pose it to either Edward or Glenn throughout. Edward, let me turn it back to you.
So to further prove this point, we pulled some data from our financial benchmarking database to again further illustrate the impact of incremental revenue or increased conversion rates on the overall financial impact of the practice. So as you can see here, top performing practices are generating higher revenue per FTE physician than the average practice. Operationally, these practices are supporting the same headcount, but through a number of factors, one potentially being higher rates of conversion, the top performers are able to generate almost $1 million more in physician revenue. The same is also true for other provider types, in this case, physician assistant and nurse practitioners. Most likely these are offering injectable services, but you can see here the top performing PAs and MPs in our database are generating over $500,000 more than the average practice. So now that you've been exposed to the objective data for top performers, I'll turn things over to Glenn to provide you with some key success factors in achieving top performing results.
And excellent. Glenn, as we switch this over to your screen for projection, Edward, maybe one question for you during the screen transfer. So this data, is that largely derived from plastic surgery surgical revenues when you were sharing those revenue benchmarks?
The revenue benchmarks are actually inclusive of plastic surgery practices and dermatology practices that receive more than 50% of their revenue from cosmetic sources.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I think that context is, I think, definitely an important one. And I think as we look at that last screen that you shared, one of the things that we might see by way of pushback from those that they're looking at and trying to understand these numbers, you mentioned that qualification of patients is, something that those practices who were high performing did exceptionally well. That could also mean that they see fewer consults in total, but the revenue figures suggest that the qualifications aren't in fact limiting them, that it's continuing to help them focus their consultation time on high converting patients. Is that a fair assessment of what those revenue numbers tell us?
It absolutely is. Yep. I mean, it also could be a service mix, right? There are a lot of different factors that would play into that revenue factor in general, but certainly a higher conversion rate would in fact impact that.
Excellent. Thanks so much. Glenn, take it away.
Thank you, Ryan, and Edward, thank you so much. I just want to share with everyone that what Edward does for BSM Consulting and all the consultants at BSM is just could not be replicated. It's absolutely amazing. He manages a massive amount of data and helps us approach our job in a very analytical way and provides so much substance to the work that we do. So thank you, Edward. And
thank you, Glenn.
And I'd also like to thank Etna. Thank you, Ryan, for providing us with an opportunity to share some of this data and share some information about how we interpret this data and the consistent observations that we make regarding the top 10%. I've actually worked with Ryan since, I think, 2012, Ryan. I was thinking about it earlier.
I actually think I think we may go back farther than that. I think 2010 is when we first started doing some work together.
Wow, that's a long time. But there you go. And so 2010, and at that point in time, honestly, there were not many people doing medical marketing, medical aesthetic marketing in particular. And so in my world, Ryan, in my mind, Ryan really set the standard and continues to do so. So thank you so much, Ryan.
Excellent. And Glenn, if we could, if you can either speak a little bit louder or get a little bit closer to your microphone, pick up a couple of our audience members have noted that your volume is a little bit lower.
Okay, let's see. Does this sound better, Ryan?
Yeah, you're a little bit closer and clearer. Thanks so much. And
okay, terrific. So in talking about the top 10%, we have noticed that there are several things that the top 10% practices consistently have in common. We see a lot of accountability, and accountability is at all levels. It's at the leadership level, it is at a provider level, and then all the way through the ranks of staffing. And so personal accountability is it's something that's measurable, but it's also a cultural set. And we have it at BSM in spades. I work in a culture of accountability. And so I can, really spot it when I work in a practice, and it's a beautiful thing. Another thing that I notice is and encourage, and when I don't notice it, I recommend it, is tracking, measuring, and being able to manage key performance metrics because you're tracking and measuring them. And we're going to talk about some of those key performance metrics today. And then the third thing that we'll talk about is to think about having a culture of self-examination, because that means that you're always sort of taking a step back and looking at how you do things and looking at yourself and how you are doing your own job and how it impacts those around you. Some of the ideals that I talk about when I am working with practices that are among the top 10% are that they are continually articulating their mission and their vision for the future. And it's very deliberate. When I work with a practice that is just sort of launching, that seems like a waste of time for some reason. And it's interesting, how that changes once staff become engaged in the mission and vision. And if you've ever worked on a team that is passionate, and I work with quite a few teams that are passionate about the provider that they work with or the practice that they work with, then there's sort of a vigor and passion that comes with that, and that is fueled by mission and vision. And so it's something that should be a part of hiring. It should be a part of recruitment, onboarding, and certainly the training and continual development of all employees. Another thing that is absolutely essential is the delineation of roles and responsibilities. If there's not ownership with some of the key things that have to happen in a practice, then they don't always happen the way we think they should. Their cross-training is a wonderful thing, but at the end of the day, we want one person to own key responsibilities, and then that one person has a backup plan. And then we, sort of talked about personal accountability as a cultural norm.
Hey, Glenn, before you go into the next slide, a second there about the expression of practice goals. Now, sure. As a part of our intake with our new clients and an annual review that we do with our existing clients, we always step back and dive into practice goals, and surprised how often, especially for practices that are new to working with Etna, something as simple as a revenue target just doesn't exist. Mm-hmm. So when you look at the expression of goals that are driving these top practices to performance, how do they most often take shape? Is it a revenue goal? Is it a procedure count? Is it some expression about the service or outcomes they want for patients? What does that look like?
It's such a great question, Ryan. An hour ago, I had a call with a manager and a marketing intern. And this is a relatively small practice. They are not yet part of the 10%, but they want to be, so they're focusing. And this is the first time that they've had a meeting about setting goals and articulating, the implementation plan against those goals. And we had that very conversation, and it really, it really caused them to pause and look back at the last 12 months. And they realized that a lot of the marketing that they had done in the last 12 months really was not targeted. It really was not in the direction that they needed to grow or wanted to grow. It wasn't specific. It didn't have specific objectives, either financial or patient type or, surgery type. And so it was an aha moment for them to understand that, at a higher level, we articulate goals, and then that drives the activity in the practice. Does that make sense?
It does, but I'm gonna keep pushing on you because that's my way. What would it be? What would be the best outcome from that consultation? Would it be an expression of a specific? Hey, we did 200 breast augmentations last year. We want to do 400. Would it be, we did $200,000 in revenue from dermal fillers this year? We want to do $1 million. Like, what is it? What does it structurally look like, or what are a couple of examples there? Because I know those are people on the call there are going to want to walk away, be inspired, and go do this. But always a model helps.
Yes. So for this particular practice, they had put a lot into a pay-per-click campaign and were focused on breast reconstruction and primary breast augmentation. And, and they didn't marry together any specifics. So when pushed, they said, yeah, we actually do know exactly how much we need to grow this because Dr. So-and-so has told us. He said he wanted to do an additional 5 breast augmentations, cosmetic primary breast augmentations per month. So that's a real number. And I asked about, the reconstructive and was told, well, actually, he does not want to grow that at this point in time. And so, it begs the question, why are you paying for a pay-per-click campaign in that direction if that's not what you want to grow? And, are you tracking and measuring for that very specific number? And so they did drill down to, if we are on a monthly basis, we have a very specific goal, and we're gonna retarget our marketing dollars for that goal and that goal alone.
Yeah, Glenn, that's such a great point. And before I let you move on, I will say for our audience, that's a beautiful way to express your objectives in terms of those monthly real-world targets, because we can use for example, what Edward just shared, the benchmark models or the actual conversion numbers in your practice to work up from there. Dividing that 5. Those 5 new patients that you want, dividing that by those conversion metrics to actually identify how many new leads that you need in that procedure category to achieve that result, and that becomes a beautiful target to guide your team and your investments and things like marketing. So, excellent, Glenn. Thank you so much. I'm sorry, I'll let you get back to your regularly scheduled program.
No, and you know what, please keep interrupting with those kinds of questions, because I think it's, that kind of practical advice that helps practices understand how to solve. And that's what I'm talking about when I'm working in practices. This is math. We can do the backwards math all day long. So the core values that I hear practices articulating, among the top 10%. Our personal accountability, collaboration, transparency. Every practice has their own core values, and this is again going back to, how do you hire? And are these continually articulated? And are they modeled at the highest level and required at every level? It makes a difference. I actually did a survey of, it was a survey that was hand selected. I actually reached out to the top performer in almost every practice I work with. And just the next time I spoke with them said, what inspires you? And it was fascinating, but these are the answers that I got. And the most fascinating part is in having these conversations over the last 12 months with rock stars in the top 10%, never once did money come into it. It was mission focused, feeling heard, feeling understood, being excited to be able to connect and offer contributions that are meaningful. I think that we can never, ever assume that we know what inspires people. We have to ask and let them be a part of the brand, because guess what? They are. And I always look outside of medical aesthetics and look at businesses that have done an amazing job. And I'll just mention a couple. Disney World, the Ritz-Carlton. The Ritz is, referenced a lot in medical aesthetics. But what do these two businesses have in common with the practices that we're talking about? What are they doing that, is very much like what we see in the top 10%. Service excellence for sure, but at an operational level, when I go to Disney World or when I go to a hotel like the Ritz, I look at them from an operational standpoint, and I just can't help myself because, that's the way I look at a practice when I go in. And so I'm fascinated by consistency and continuity. And that is what we're always solving for. Does the person answering the phone in Bangkok answer the phone the same way that the person in Boston answers the phone? And do I feel great every time? Is the cash handling process the same at one kiosk at Disney as it is another? And so, the point I'm making is we have to figure out what is the very best way to do something, and that's the operation, whether it's answering the phone, charge entry, consultation. Everything that we do is an activity, and it's forward facing, it's patient centric. And so we have to first solve for what is the best way to do this. And then we have to make sure that it's plug and play. No matter who is doing this in our practice, they can just step into my shoes and do it the same way with the same excellence over and over and over.
And I know, Glenn, one of the things about that topic that I find really interesting is, and I've studied both those brands, is not just that they have designed exceptional experiences for the best of times, but they've invested significant effort and energy in what in the industry we very often talk of as service recovery.
Yeah.
When things are going bad, what happens? And it's been my experience, I don't know if this is your experience as well, and you might talk about this a little bit, is that in aesthetic clinics, we assume that things are always going to go well. And if something goes bad, it's the idea that, well, this will just be escalated to the manager. And it's my feeling that we don't, let's take something very, very simple, like, the doctor or the nurse injector is running behind.
Yeah.
Which is a bad service moment for the people that are in your reception, sitting there waiting for treatment and worried about their very busy day. And I'm startled by how few practices actually have a protocol in place about what they're going to do the moment they realize they are 20 minutes or more behind. Yeah. So how much do those top practices, do you think, are thinking about not just the good times, but the bad times, and how to service in those moments?
That is, I wish I had a slide on that very thing. That's brilliant, because guess what? I spend a ton of time talking about this. And practices in the top 10% have solved it. If not perfectly, then they are seeking solutions on everything that goes wrong all the time. And the great thing is, by identifying things that go wrong, we have an opportunity to differentiate. If they're going wrong in your practice, they're going wrong in other practices. And so if you can figure out a way to, you know, to differentiate, to help your front desk person manage through that 20-minute late that turns into a 20-minute appointment that turns into an hour late, or a product mishap, whatever service recovery issue your team is facing, each person at a boots on the ground level needs to know, what do they have within their sphere of control to manage this situation without escalating it. Because, Ryan, you make a good point. When things escalate, they are worse. If you have to, go above my head to a manager, it's going to be worse. And so, we could talk a long time about identifying problems and differentiation, but that is, in and of itself, an entire workshop.
There's our next webinar topic.
Yeah, there it is. There it is. But the face of your practice, each individual that is on stage, front stage, be it the front desk person or phone staff or a clinical support person or provider, every single person in the practice is the brand. It's not necessarily the owner, as much as they, may be the face of the practice on the website. In the patient's mind, everyone that has a touch point with the patient is the brand. And so every experience they have with each of those touch points defines the brand. And so we have to, bear that in mind and help each person that works in the practice manage themselves. So this comes back, full circle to personal accountability, and why the notion of managing people has to change in the medical aesthetic world. Because if you're always, trying to micromanage and correct misbehavior or get people to do a certain thing, you're really on a hamster wheel of frustration. If you instill the belief that we are all personally accountable, then each person then owns the responsibility of looking in the mirror and understanding, what can I do in my job that will redefine this job, not just, redefine me, but how can I redefine this job? And from the point that a person is hired into the practice, all the way through to a morning huddle or a staff meeting, each individual is potentially going to be reporting the key metrics for their position or for a key activity that they own. They are reporting that all the time to the team. So they're accountable for the activity, but they're also accountable to the team, which is a very powerful thing. The slide that I just put up is just, sort of the key metrics for a variety of positions, and it's really meant just to help show that there are so many things that, each position can be held accountable for or can hold themselves accountable for. I mentioned a minute ago the daily huddle, and I will tell you that the daily huddle is something that if all of the 10% isn't doing it, I would be a little bit shocked. Some variation of a daily huddle happens. Maybe it's a daily huddle on clinic day. versus an OR day if it's a surgical practice. But the daily huddle is a time when we demonstrate personal accountability. And so it is not a time that, you know, people get together and complain. It's a time that we literally put our heads together and identify issues that are going to potentially occur that day and figure out how we're going to avoid them or weather through them or pull in, you know, the backup troops so that we can navigate them and keep the patient experience excellent. So consistency and continuity at every touch point. You know, in terms of the quality of those touch points, engaging and building a connection, continually credentialing the practice and the provider. And, you know, it's when we talk about engagement, it means that we are actively listening when patients are speaking. And it's interesting how often when I'm in a practice, even with very, very talented providers and staff, how often nuances are missed. And granted, it's my job. You know, I am, you know, really a good listener. It's my job to listen and take note of everything from body language to intonation to tone. But my job is to hear and see and help, you know, the people that are working in this practice see and hear the same way I do. And so it's not hard, but you do have to practice it. And it's an ideal thing if everyone is practicing it. There's really no one that works in a practice setting that couldn't benefit from practicing these skills. And if we're all practicing them together, you know, and sort of watching each other's back, then when a patient is, you know, throwing out 10 different things and I potentially miss one, then my colleague sitting next to me is completely comfortable saying, oh, don't forget, you know, she also mentioned that her mother might be interested in coming in. And so, you know, we should have that transparency and comfort level that, you know, there's no such thing as failure. We just, you know, we are all part of a team that are, you know, will help each other weather through. So, you know, I felt like I needed to talk about how you might be feeling if you need to, you know, you might need to push a reset button. If you feel like your practice doesn't have personal accountability, or if you feel like you are caught in a cycle of, you know, the same things going wrong, you know, twice a week or 4 times a week, you know, how do you get out of that cycle? How do you move on from there? And it really, you know, comes down to creating that great culture and establishing core values and, you know, deciding as a practice, deciding as individuals, but deciding as a team that personal accountability matters. And if each person in the practice embraces that, then everyone will benefit. So recruitment, onboarding, collaborative training, cultivating stars, all of this with that personal accountability piece is a, you know, a whole different thing. Focusing on the patient experience, a little earlier I mentioned front stage, and I'm sure some of you have sort of heard different ways of describing it, but when I work in a practice, I sort of describe it as front stage and backstage. And so the patient experience, if you think about Disney has an entire underground so that their employees can get from place to place at Disney without any of their guests being aware of it. And they do that for a reason. You know, they've embraced the concept of front stage, backstage. And so nothing about the mechanics is ever seen by a guest at Disney. And the same thing really has to happen and does happen in that top 10%. You know, if you are in the middle of a consultation with a patient, then in the top 10%, they would never see you prepare the quote. They would walk in and that would be prepared, and it would be in a beautiful folder, and you know, all of the mechanics for putting that together would have been done somewhere else. And so, you know, front stage, backstage, having that concept, teaching that concept and really embracing it, and keeping, you know, personal conversations out of any sort of patient facing environment, all of that, you know, really matters.
And Glenn, if I can interject a personal experience here. Recently, we were just working with a practice that was new to Etna, was having some challenges with online reputation, and there was a very clear theme in the negative reviews that we were finding online that we're working to rehabilitate, and it was specifically about the staff in the very front office, those that are at the front desk in the space that was shared with patients who were in waiting, conducting personal business, eating their lunch, texting on the phone, conducting personal calls, sort of breaking through that, you know, the front stage, backstage wall, and really frustrating patients who were not enjoying their experience in the office because they really were being drawn into the personal lives of, you know, the people in the front of the house. So I definitely want to bring our listeners today back to the reality that this is not a high and mighty idea that you have to dig tunnels under your office to shuttle your staff around. This is really a very immediate and tangible opportunity to consciously think about how your service is perceived by the patient at every point that they're interacting with your team.
Yeah. It's critical. It's funny. I'll tell another super quick story about a practice in Austin, Texas that is fabulous, unbelievable. But this physician just built out this beautiful new space, and it's absolutely stunning. And I worked with them all through that, you know, that phase. And we went in. I went in. When it had just opened, like the day after they had opened their doors, and at the front desk was this spectacular marble desk, and everything is clean, pristine. But behind the desk, there was nowhere for this employee to put anything personal, nowhere to put a purse or, you know, anything. And there was also nowhere for them to put anything, you know, work related. There was, you know, it was just a piece of marble desk. And I said, you know, we've got to put something, we've got to cut into the wall. We need shelves and they have to be hidden. And there's, you know, you can't, their solution was let's put some shelves over here in the corner. And I said, absolutely not. Patients will see that. And you spent millions of dollars building out, and it's destroyed if you have open shelves and patients can see that. It has to be hidden. Nothing can be seen by patients. And, you know, at the time they were over budget, and I felt a little guilty by being so insistent, but they did it. It didn't cost that much. And at the end of the day, I was actually there 2 weeks ago, and that front desk person said to me, thank God we built this. I can't tell you how, and it was, you know, had all kinds of practice, you know, materials in there, and that, you know, that she needs to be able to give to patients, and that colleagues leave. But they have embraced front stage and backstage, and there are no drinks ever on, you know, anyone's desk within patient sight lines. They have swinging doors, sliding doors, and it's just, you know, it's a concept. If it's embraced by everyone, it's very manageable. So discipline of planning and execution. I would say that this is probably the most difficult for every practice I've ever worked with, but it is absolutely a key success factor. It's really easy to go in and diagnose what is wrong. And you can feel pretty smart if you can walk into a practice and say, oh, you've got to fix this and this and this. But to articulate a plan to correct the things that need to be improved and to prioritize and then implement over a period of time in a manner that is sustainable, that is hard. It's doable though, so I would say that, creating a new discipline and not being overwhelmed when, things don't go exactly as planned. That's when course correction occurs. But the developing a discipline around the planning and the execution and implementation of ideas and plans made at a strategic planning session or meeting is absolutely a key success factor. And all of those together, come together with great leadership. So I want to just sort of leave everyone with some key questions. And, as Edward said, what we are always trying to do is challenge ourselves, but also challenge clients to think differently and to turn the cube and look at yourselves differently, look at the situations that you encounter that are challenging slightly differently. And ask yourself some questions such as, are we creating an environment that allows everyone here to be an overachiever? Are we raising the bar for ourselves and analyzing? Do we have a mission and vision, and are we passionate about that? And then as individuals, no matter what role we play in a practice, are we modeling the way? So I wish everyone on the call tremendous success in creating a culture of accountability, and appreciate Etna sponsoring this webinar today. Thank you, Ryan.
Excellent, Glenn. Thank you. We have a couple minutes left before we approach the end of the hour. We will definitely use that time for Q&A. And if you want to actually, Glenn, if you don't mind, you can leave that final screen up there with your contact information. And for everybody that's on the call, I know a couple of you joined us just a little bit late. As a reminder, on the bottom of your screen, if you place the cursor near the edge of the Zoom window on the bottom, you'll expose the Q&A icon in the gray bar. Click that, it's going to open a new window, and you can toss in some additional questions. I'll go ahead and moderate those as we wrap up. The first of the questions coming in, Edward, I think is directed toward you, perhaps. You might be best equipped to answer that. In looking at the analysis, and I'm trying to remember those numbers, what I remember seeing is that the difference between kind of the average no-show and exceptional, the top 10%, was the difference between 2% no-show and 8.9 or 9%. But that's, and numerically that seems 7 points, it's kind of small. And then the difference between the consult to surgery was 45% versus something like 67%. But when you did that math and you look at the combined effect of those two things together, do I remember correctly? It's 50% more completed surgeries in the top 10% of clinics. Is that what we're?
Yeah. Yeah, it's something close to that, but it's demonstrating the lower no-show rate and the higher conversion rate just demonstrates the compounding impact of additional patients available for throughput through that funnel that we looked at.
So no-show rates are a really interesting topic, and we have a question coming in really quickly about the difference by procedure. You would indicate, I think, the top no-show rates were on procedures like breast augmentation. The lowest no-show rate were on facelift. The questions coming in from the audience is there data available or data that you can share that looks at no-show rates by referral source? I'm going to extemporize and guess at what they're getting at here is, do word-of-mouth referrals no-show at a lower rate, say, than a lead from online marketing or pay-per-click? Do you have data in that vein?
We do have actually quite a bit of data by that. We track 13 different referral sources.
Okay.
Excuse me. And those that we see, the traditional word of mouth, or they're an existing patient or friend or family of an existing patient, we see those conversion rates significantly higher than we do some of the external marketing strategies. So not just online, but even if you talk about TV and radio or print ad, they tend to be more effective. So there's a big component of what I'd refer to as internal marketing where you see higher conversion rates as a result of that.
Yeah, and just to clarify, so is what you just said there was that the TV and radio are more effective at converting? Did I hear that right?
Less.
Oh, less effective.
Yeah, I was just trying to be clear that it's not specific to online marketing.
Yeah.
Any of those external marketing sources, so TV and radio being one, print ad in a newspaper or magazines being another one, those types of more external marketing sources tend to have a little bit lower conversion rate than those internal, such as current patients or physician referrals or even friend and family referrals.
Excellent, excellent. So questions coming in talking about the FTE information for nurse practitioners and PAs. Was the $350,000 that came up on the screen there a collection per year? Was that on the average practice? Can you hit those numbers again, Edward?
Yeah, great. Yep. I have I can share that slide if you'd like me to.
Okay, that'd be great. We can pass that out as a part of what goes out to attendees, and we can bring that back up on the screen now as well.
Yeah, so the 350 is actually the 25th percentile of the database, and that's all of the collections. That's annual collections on a normalized basis. So we take the total collections for non-physician provider or physician, what we refer to as non-physician provider, which is a PA or an MP in a practice, their total annual collections, and then their FTE count. And their FTE count is one FTE or full-time equivalent would be 2,080 hours a year. And we divide the two to normalize that metric so that it's comparable across practices and across the industry. And the range that you see here, the benchmark range, the 350 is the 25th percentile or the low end. If you think about a bell curve, the 350 would be the left-hand side or the low end of the bell curve, and the 750 is the 75th percentile or the low end on the right side of the bell curve.
And that normalization is because we have a lot of practices whose PAs and NPs aren't necessarily working full-time. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So yeah, so that division, if they're three-quarter time or half-time, accounts for the fact that they couldn't reach top productivity. But so that normalization is valuable there. You know,
Right.
and the spread here, if we look at how dramatic the revenue potential is there, I know everybody on the call is obviously aware of this, but what we see very often is that especially in those practices that have a surgical focus, which I know are part of your database, as much as there's an interest in pursuing revenue from non-surgical surgeons, we often see that it's sort of a stepchild in the marketing and that it's not given a budget allocation to grow that side of the practice, where surgeons are very often interested in focusing the dollars on higher dollar, perhaps in some cases higher margin surgical procedures. But interestingly, we actually see most of our practices that focus on non-surgicals easily outperform that 75th percentile number. So that's very interesting to see.
Yeah, I would agree with that too. That when they start to get into the targeted or strategic or more focused marketing strategy, if they identify the non-physician provider as an area of opportunity for their practice to drive revenue, and certainly as an owner, you're trying to articulate or identify areas for incremental margin. If you want margin expansion as an owner, this may be one of those places that you'd explore. And so having that targeted marketing or strategic marketing strategy will tend to drive that result up to the 75th percentile, as you said. Yep.
Well, excellent. I want to thank you, Edward and Glenn, both so much, and to BSM, the entire family over there, for granting you the time out to share this with our audience today. This has been spectacular. As a reminder to everyone on the call, we were recording today's presentation. As we do with all of our webinars, it takes us roughly 2 to 4 days to process the videos, get it published online, but everybody who registered, whether or not they will be able to attend, or were able to attend, will receive the link to watch the playback so they can share this great information with their colleagues by next week. Again, I want to thank everybody today for their time in presenting, but once more, I know you all join me in thanking Edward and Glenn. Thank you both so much for participating.